Today's talk, which I'm going to have to speed up on, is called No More of the Same Bad Security, which you guys all read. And I probably don't have to say that again because you know why you're here. The first thing you should actually know is that this is my very last conference. So if you hate my talk, that's okay. You will never have to see me at another conference again. So just bear with me and just enjoy then the fact that I'm done. But I'm officially not going to be doing conferences anymore as a speaker. You may see me in seminars or other things, but definitely not as a conference speaker again. So just enjoy the fact that this is my last one. No more of the big same bad security. We were also going to title this, hey, you realize it doesn't switch here now. That's great. Why the OSINT 3 is threatening modern security practices. That was the alternate title. But we're also looking at saying why ESACOM didn't release a new OSINT version for 7 years, which was another possible title, which is something else that I'm going to talk about. Then again, we can also say why security professionals keep doing things they see don't work, which would also be another good title, I thought. I wasn't exactly sure which title to pick, so I just thought I'd throw a bunch of them out there. And we'll try to cover all of these things as we work. Still more titles. Why security professionals prefer to waste their time catching viruses and finding vulnerabilities instead of actually securing things. It's another possible title to this talk. Again, we're going to try to cover that as well. Yeah, a lot of topics, a lot of themes. We're just going to fly through them. Okay, this is me. Normally, when you do these speaking things, you always show a picture of yourself and let people know who you are. So this is me. That's my identification, so you can recognize. Actually, this picture was designed specifically to be alluring to women, yet non-threatening to men. You're laughing because it's threatening? The one lady laughing because it's alluring? This is me again on a boat in the Arctic. On a boat. This is me again at CERN in the comments. This is me again, doing another conference. You notice the shirt doesn't change? I never wash it. Oh, there's me again at a bake-off. There's mistakes. Yeah? All right, so basically, I think it's funny that people who do conferences do this big ego stroke of saying who they are or that it's important to see pictures of them and what their background is and who they're related to. So I just kind of wanted to throw that out there so you knew who I was and that I've been on a boat and I made steaks and stuff, just to kind of back up my experience. But I think what's really important is what people have done, right? So just before I start, you should know a little bit about what I've done. I made that, okay? I also made the Bad People Project, also available online. That too, I made Hacker High School, and it's actually, I would have to say that it's had almost twice as many downloads as the OSINT itself, and it's replicated all over the world. It's probably our hugest project, even if people don't know it or don't suspect it. But really, it is everywhere. If you Google for Hacker High School, you will find the lessons everywhere. I think we probably make up half of rapid share download on our own. I make this, the home security methodology, so that's another thing we've done, which applies the OSINT to home security. Smarter, Safer, Better is something we also just made. It's for, we do it for children, we do it for average, ordinary people to try to give them better critical thinking skills, explain to them about security by showing them how they can be victims or why they make themselves victims. It's a completely different way of approaching security awareness. Also comes from the OSINT itself. We made this quite a while ago. And I made that really recently for Halloween. That should help you. Okay, let's go to the beginning. In the beginning, when we began the OSINT, because that's why you're here, you want to hear about that. When we began the OSINT back in December 2000, I think, yeah, because we released it January 2001. Basically, all we knew was best practices. I'm not going to read it to you. And really what happened was out there in the security industry, we had a lot of security going on where people were getting paid to develop ways of testing, methodologies, ways of building security. And what they did was they went out on this beautiful interweb thing, and they looked at what other people had done for references. References, by references I mean copy-paste. And it got around. And when so many people were doing it, they called it a best practice. Why? Because everybody else is doing it. And that's why you did it, because everybody else is doing it. The problem with best practices, it probably was best idea for somebody at that time. Now, I'm sure most of you have friends who think they have pretty good ideas at times, right? And by the time they tell you their ideas, then they're disappointed because you don't share that it was a great idea. But somehow, the interweb makes everything more important, and when people start publishing their great ideas about security, and even worse, people start developing tools and ideas behind it, it becomes a best practice, which then government workers who work, let's be generous, 4-hour days, not counting coffee breaks, they also have to make documents, official documents. And their official documents, because they're so dedicated in their government jobs, they do the research by going out on the interweb and taking other best practices that other large companies are doing. And of course, then it becomes an official best practice, which ends up into compliance, right? And that's where we are today. That is the state of our Titanic, okay? That's the beginning. So, what do we have now to show for it? This security is a process, people. If hackers want to get in, they'll really get in. There is a persistent threat. There's nothing we can do to stop them. Obviously, somebody who says that failed physics. But the point is that this is what we contend with. This is our excuse. Whenever we bitch and moan about security, people fall into the build, secure, patch, update, patch again, update, clean, fix, rebuild. And that's what happens. And so for people now, especially people graduating school right now, people just entering into the industry, people who are only exposed to security in this way, this is all they know. Now, most of us got here because we were working with defect products in the defective society, the defective industry, and we kind of built our way up into falling into this pattern. Because to do anything else now is to no longer cover our asses. So we're kind of stuck doing this, and we're stuck with compliance that makes us do this, and we're stuck with bosses that make us do this, and we're stuck with hardware, software that makes us do this. As a matter of fact, as much as people don't like to hear it, patching and upgrades is a form of marketing perpetuated by the companies who do it. Why? Because marketing, successful marketing, puts itself in front of your face multiple times a day, a week, a year, right? In TV, how many times do we play the same commercials again and again? Well, Microsoft, or I shouldn't pick on them, anybody who requires you to do regular updating, regular patching, regular fixes, they're constantly in your face. And if they're doing a positive thing for you, hey, we're fixing this for you. Look, hey, free, we're checking, I found a fix for you. Let me install it for you. They keep doing this for you. But what they're not saying is, and I'm sure some of you wouldn't click OK if they said this, is, let me change some of your base code for you, regardless of what you're possibly running right now that might depend on it. That's what they're not saying. In which case, you might just hover over OK and think about it for a moment. But you don't. They call it an update, a security patch. Show of hands here, and I want you to be honest. How many people here, and trust me, if I'm wrong, I'll shut up and I'll say, okay, maybe not, Switzerland. But show of hands here, how many people have ever installed an update, a patch, or an upgrade, only to find that something doesn't work afterwards? Holy crap! That's impossible. Because it's good for you, right? I mean, I made the point last night about sugarless gum. Sugarless gum, great for you, because the dentist says so, but you chew a lot of it, you get diarrhea. Why? Because the sugarless part of the fake sugar that they put in sugarless gum is not good for your belly. Okay? And this is sort of the same thing. They're doing things because they think that, well, you think they have your best interests at heart, but actually what they're doing is a form of marketing. They're getting in front of your face in a positive scenario by helping you. And it's not helping. And the problem is that a lot of lazy people fall back into the routine. Security is a process. And you know what's even better? Is that people build and stake their entire careers are committed on this process. They go out there, they say it, and they've said it so often that now they can no longer change saying what they're saying. They can't even concede to you that there might be something wrong because they've built their careers on it. Okay? And sure, right now we can feel sorry for those people, or we can tend to agree with them, or maybe some of you are them. But in the end, it's going to go away with the buggy whip. Eventually, people are going to realize that the tool you have, the tool you're using, doesn't work. And there's no need for it. And better tools are going to come along. So, we're stuck in this process. It goes around and around. And people who work in security, and I'm assuming most of you do, some of you might just be developers, but people who actively work in security, they spend most of their time putting out fires. They install everything they're supposed to, they have the certifications they're supposed to, they follow the compliance to the best of their ability, they do what they can, and they end up with the zero. Okay? Because they're just running around in a loop all the time. That's it. They have nothing to show for it. How do you build a secure network, a secure system, a secure building, a secure anything, if you keep having to start over again? You don't. And the problem is that the base model of security that has existed in IT for so long now that we think that it's right is actually wrong. And yeah, you can throw tomatoes at me now and stuff, and I'm hoping that I can kind of show you a little bit better what I mean. But I think already you know something is wrong. Every single one of you who raised your hands now has already suspected that there's something wrong with the security model we're using. So I'm actually not telling you anything that you haven't already suspected or known. Most of you already know this. Okay, show of hands, how many people suspect that something that they're doing with security right now, from what you're being told, might be wrong? Yeah, okay. No, you didn't want to raise your hand. You only did it because you looked around. You guy with glasses. I saw. So, see, then there's the people who only do what other people do. So it's called that social predicament. All right, not to pick on people. Okay, so the first thing we did when we were designing the OSTA, I told you we followed best practices because that's all I knew too. That's what I thought was right. I did the same thing that everybody else did, and I collected the best practices, and I said, there's got to be a defined way to show how to test security. And since I'm not an authority on it, I was just this lowly security tester, laid out the garbage, that kind of thing. And I had to rely on the shoulders of giants. Those people out there who now I know, basically the marketing departments of their companies promoted them as being the experts that they are. I didn't know that then. I actually thought they were the experts that they were. And the authorities that they were, just because they had a title. But I believed that back then. And I started collecting it, and I started putting it together. And that was version 1 of the OSTA. And then I kept going. I said, okay, this is good. But I fell upon a better methodology, which became OSTA 2. Except I had a problem now. The best practices didn't fit with the methodology. I had the tool methodology, which was better. It was clearly better. Why? Because it made logical sense. It had a mathematical, logical basis, where the other one was just sort of a hacker tripping through things. Now I actually followed real quality testing standards. And I said, well, wait a minute. How is it that this hacking stuff that we did, it should just match up with this methodology? So something's wrong. We're doing something wrong. And then we moved on to 2.1, where we tried to add metrics to it. And that's where I really realized something is fundamentally wrong because it can't be measured. Our risk assessment values that we were trying to do were so off so much of the time because they were biased. And I thought to myself, this can't be. How can we be so biased when we're quantifying? Every time you test, you measure something, right? How do you measure how big this table is? You test it with a ruler. You compare it against something that we have. You can compare it against something to see how heavy it is, how much mass it has, how dense it is. You test it to measure it. We were testing networks, yet we were incapable of measuring it. That tells you something is wrong, something is broken. In your living room, you try to measure your table by testing it, and you keep coming up with different numbers. Okay? Imagine you did that. Imagine you go and you have this fancy new ruler, those infrared ones or whatever, that tells you the distance between 2 points, and you want to see if you can fit this new table in your room, so you want to measure it, and you go, and every time you put it down, you get a different number. Do you think you're wrong, or the ruler is wrong? Or your method of testing the room is wrong? You don't know. You don't know. Why? Because you just want to put a damn table in here. That's all you want to do. But you know something's wrong. And this is where we were with 2.0. And so we started having to address the philosophy of what security was. Starting with, what the hell is security? If I asked every single one of you in this room independently, what is security, you would each give me a different answer. Well, some of you CISSPs would probably all just regurgitate the same thing. But for the most part, you would all have your own idea of what security is. Now again, I'm not saying what is contained in security. I'm talking about in operations, how do you assure something is secure? And I should actually have this over here. So, I knew that we had to address the philosophy of security. So what is security? Does security have to be reactive? Meaning, you have to attack something first in order for security to exist. So there was a lot of philosophy behind this. We started thinking and talking, and I'm sure a lot of you have had these same discussions, these same conversations, and a lot of them came out. Is risk right for security? Risk is a funny thing. Is risk right for anything, actually, if you want to think of it that way? I've made some points before. There's a lot of industries who use risk. And I'm sure every industry that I can point out that uses risk, you can tell me a fundamental problem with their method. Insurance companies use risk to say how much people have to pay and how much coverage they get to have. What's the problem then? Some people don't get insured. Some people never qualify, which means that some people will never get compensation for an accident or a problem. Casinos use risk. Okay? They do it to game their system so that the house always wins a little bit more. Okay? Who loses there? You get the gamblers. Right? The fact that the people have to keep gambling in order to feel like they're winning. I probably have another example. Can't think of it now. And you probably do too. If you can think of any industry that uses risk, the big thing you're going to find is that there's a loser. You cannot use risk without having a loser. In security, whenever you use risk, you are assuming that some people are going to fall under the bus, right? You know, you say, well, I use this product, and it's going to protect most of, right? Which means that by default, you're saying, I am going to apply this security by throwing a few users under the bus. That's what I'm going to do. And you actively do this. And what do you call it? Well, you call it risk. Well, that's the risk you take. It's a risk of doing business. It's a risk of... And the problem is that when you talk about security, like you talk about healthcare, and probably the thing that pisses off people the most about government healthcare is that they do it all by the statistics, right? Which is okay for the majority. It just really sucks if it's you who doesn't get the treatment, or somebody you love who doesn't get the treatment, because they don't follow the statistics. And when you're building an organization, and you're building security into the organization, and you're already deciding before you buy the product, before you build your security, that you're already going to be throwing some of these people under the bus, you have to realize it's going to suck for them. But you know, that's the risk, right? That's what you're doing. And you're already saying that's okay. And why do we say that's okay? because there's nothing else, right? There's nothing else that comes close, or at least there wasn't. And this was some of the stuff we had to address. There are inherent biases. And I'm sorry, but in security and healthcare, our job is to protect everyone. Not most people, everyone, to the best of our ability. And if it's just a network at the company, and you're telling me I'm going overboard here, still, your job is to protect everything. And that's what it is. Not some things, not as much as you can while you still cover your ass. It's about doing everything. And again, this was the philosophy we had to address, okay? And it took us through this. We had some really tough ones. And we started looking at, okay, why are we measuring threats based on some biased risk? Why are we using risk for looking at threats? People say, oh, you can't defend your company unless you start with a threat matrix or threat tree. Well, yeah, really? You're going to tell me every single threat that's going to come down the line tomorrow in your threat tree? And what's the answer? We get the low-hanging fruit. Does that sound like a cover-your-ass statement or what? You know? Well, we're doing the best that we can. It's good enough. Okay? And it's true. And you know what? We can get away with it because our industry lets us get away with it. And that's perfectly fine for the people who want to do the bare minimum possible not to lose their jobs. Okay? Because our industry is one big freaking excuse. That's what it is. And we live it, and we live the lie every single time we rely on that excuse. And that might be fine for your jobs, but I'm telling you, when it comes to compliance, and society telling me what I have to do, and the government telling me what I have to do, and they're relying on those lies to tell me what to do, then I have a problem with it. And yeah, it's just security, but security is so broad, it's so wide, that it's never just security. So, we go through it, and we look at the philosophy. The next thing we had to say is, okay, it's really interesting that there's so much we don't know about security. I mean, hell, we can't even define it. And defining it, we had to start thinking about what it is for real. Really, what is it? And we started saying, okay, what are some of the things we can know? What can we quantify? What can we call facts? And so we started a fact-finding mission. And again, now we're hitting around 2006, the year 2006. Austin 2 came out in 2004. By 2006, we were up to Austin 2.2. We realized something was really wrong, that best practices might be wrong. Again, hard pill for me to swallow back then, because I was as naive as the rest of the people. And I feel sorry now for the people who were ahead of the game and also trying to convince the rest of the world, because I see what it's like. And in 2006, we were just coming to the conclusion that we could not release Austin 3 because we were wrong. Worse, all of us were wrong. And because nobody actually did any real studies. Here's an example. Most of you would believe that on a computer system, if you filter out ports, remove services, you decrease the attack surface of your system. Right? Logical. Remove ports and services, less things to attack. Sounds logical? Yes, right? I would say yes. There's not been a single independent large-scale study that has proven this. Something so basic, something we completely talk about and rely on all the time, but there's no study on it. And because there's no study on it, we can't even say which services, which ports. Does it matter if we obfuscate them or not? No, instead, people just like to spill out their own opinions, their own logic about this, and they talk about it as if it's true. But it's not true because we don't know for sure. And so we had to go approaching the Austin, finding these facts, and we had to research a lot of it to the best of our ability, and we're not a rich organization, and we did try to get a lot of organizations to help us. And the first thing that we contend with is that we have Practical facts, facts that we can prove through studies, and facts that we have in theory, because they're logical, because they mathematically make sense, but there's been no study for them. And that's part of the problem. And so when we go into OSCOM 4, one of the things we hope to do, obviously, is get more studies done. But you know the difference between me and the industries out there, the rest of the people in the industry who are selling products based on their facts, is that when I do the study and I see I am wrong, I will change the fact. I will tell the truth as it is. I'm not going to cover it up. Hell, if I'm wrong, great, because I get to move forward and I continue life with the OSCOM longer, which means it keeps alive, and we keep learning, and we keep getting better at it. And that's what I hope to do. So I don't mind if I'm proven wrong, because then we have at least a proof of something. We have a fact, another fact. So we started going through what we knew. How many ways can we steal something? There's actually only 2 ways. There's only 2 ways. And what's interesting is as you're going through the facts, and you're trying to make facts, and you're reducing what you know about security to what we call the particle, right? The molecular level. Once you reduce anything, like in material science, down to the molecular level, you can build anything you want from it, as long as you have the knowledge of how to put it together. That's why if you have money to invest, you invest in companies that do material science. Because the moment they find a cool new material, you got toys, you got games, you got new types of clothes, you got, it's amazing what they do with materials. And it's the same thing. Once we could turn security into material science, or even science, there's a lot of things that we could build. And so, 2 ways to steal something we figured out. We figured out how many reasons exist. Reasons to trust anything.
What are the 2 ways?
Who said that? Me. I may get to it, I may not, so I'm just going to tell you. Okay. 2, so if I repeat it again, sorry guys. 2 ways to do it. 1, you take it. 2, you have somebody else take it for you. That's it. There's no other way to take something. Okay? I know it sounds stupid, you think that's funny and everything, but really, it's a basic fact. And it leads to other facts. It leads for you to understand more things. Number of reasons that exist to trust anything. There are no more than 10 reasons. If somebody finds an 11th reason, great. We'll add to it, we'll fix it, we'll address it. Okay? But as of now, our studies that we've done, all the research, all the fact-finding, we have found no more than 10 reasons for you to trust anything. Okay? The interesting thing is that they all have equal weight. And this was something else we found, is how people trick people, is because if you can focus on just 1 or 2 of those trust reasons, most people will accept that. And you can be lying like hell for the other 8. And they wouldn't know it. Because they've already trusted you with their broken gut instinct. Okay? And people take advantage of that. Politicians take advantage of it. Advertising, marketing. You go down the line, people take advantage of it. Okay? People use people because they can betray these. And that's it. And the thing is that nobody had done this. Nobody sat down and said, what's the maximum number of reasons to trust anything without overlapping? Okay? How many possible operational controls exist? If you wanted to protect something against everything out there within the same channel, so let's say on the network or physically or wirelessly, let's be realistic. What's the maximum number of operational controls that you could possibly have to protect something in operation while it's running, while it's working, as a process, without them overlapping or being similar? It's only 10. Now, believe me, when we did this work and we discovered that it was 10, such a nice round number, it was kind of upsetting. Because we knew nobody was going to believe us. Because it just sounds too good to be true. As a matter of fact, when we first did it, we came up with 13 controls. Okay? Then we found that one of them wasn't an operational control at all. It wasn't a control. Okay? And I think that was training or configuration. That's not a control at all. Okay? because it's actually something you do for setting up, for building. It's an engineering task. Before you have an operation, that's when you do it. Reconfiguring, configuring. And then there were two others of these 13 that were actually not even operational controls. They were actually part of another control, which was authentication. Authentication is made up of two non-operational controls. That is identification and authorization. So anything that authenticates, whether it's a firewall authenticating packets, a login authenticating passwords, which authenticates users, a lock that authenticates by a key, any type of authentication in a virus, which authenticates based on the signature, each file, everything that you have that authenticates, either, well, it has to identify first. Identification is key. You fake the identification, you break the authentication. The other is authorization. The wrong person is authorized to have that authentication, and you break the authentication. The problem is that identification and authorization, they're not operational because they can't be transferred. You cannot give somebody's identity onto somebody else. You can give a passcard, you can give a key, okay? And the government can even give them new credentials. But somebody will always recognize that person for their identity, for who they are. You cannot transfer that. The other is authorization. You cannot transfer that. If I'm an authority and I give you the authority to be in this room, okay, and you come in here and you have your key and your pass and you come in here and you hold the door open for this guy and he walks in here, you didn't pass on authorization because the moment he's caught in here, he's still in trouble. He still has consequences. So you never gave on the authorization. You only gave on the access to the room. So these are two things that couldn't be transferred. And as we were figuring this stuff out, we were finding more and more and more facts. Okay. I don't know why everything's all squished in here. Okay, so some of the facts that we found out. I know I'm running out of time. One, testing is about interactions. That was something we found. You interact with things to test them, okay? So we have induction and intervention. Intervention is you have your world, okay? You see what information is out that is provided in the environment. When you're about to test something, you look at the environment. The target gives things out into the environment. If you wanted to, you could switch something. For instance, if it needs certain resources, you switch those resources, it grabs the resources, you have interacted with the target. Okay? Normal security testing or vulnerability testing, you hit it with a packet, the packet responds. Called an echo response or an interaction. Inquest, the target emanates information. There is an emanation. You gather or verify the emanations from the target. So there's actually only interactions in a test. If you don't have interactions, you cannot test something. As a matter of fact, it was one of the big things when we used the OSTEM to test trusted platform modules, because there are some places where an interaction actually breaks the TPM. So you couldn't test it by interacting, which made things very difficult. And we had to find a side channel methodology to get the same test that we wanted without actually interacting. Security prevents interactions. We define security by saying it separates an asset and a threat. So if you're looking for security, you separate them. And that was it. On the bare minimum of operational security, when we broke down the definition was the prevention of an interaction. When you didn't have an interaction, you had security. If something couldn't interact, it was secure. And that was it. The problem is that sometimes things... Oh, getting ahead of myself. Go back a second. Sometimes things have to interact. You can't do business without interacting, correct? You have to interact with the world. Your servers have to interact with the world. You receive emails. As a society, we interact. So that's when we found out what safety was. Safety was when you control your interactions, which led us to finding those 10 controls, going through and finding all the possible controls that you could have for anything. And knowing the max number of controls, knowing that there was no more than 10, was great, because then we knew how to apply a different variety of controls for every interaction. So, no, it's not switching. There we go. We found that interactions have purpose. So one of the interesting things we found was that we looked into this as health, and we said, okay, what if, looking at the human body, we could figure out, in Star Trek terms here, if we wanted to, we look at every single cell in your body, and we know what it does and what it interacts with. Okay? Now, of course, we're not that smart, we're not that advanced, we can't do that with the human body, but we can sure do it with networks. Okay? We look at where every interaction is and what it does, how it works. And when we could do that, the purpose of every cell, we could categorize them. And we could say what kind of cell they were and what they did. And once we could do that, we could count them. And we could do things with that information. And the interesting thing is, let's look at it this way. Imagine I take a person and I count all the cells and I give you that information. For example, you wouldn't be able to tell how tall that person is. You wouldn't be able to tell how fat that person was or how thin. Not by weight. Not in those traditional ways. But you know what you could do is you could look at that and you could count the number of fat cells compared to the other cells, and you could say what kind of environment that person would be okay in. Okay? You would know that more fat cells mean they can handle colder weather and be worse in warmer weather. Less fat cells means, and you could do this, more neurons, less neurons. You could look at the operation of the cardiac cells, how they build up the heart, which is actually something they're doing now in order for finding heart attacks. They're actually counting and looking at the amount and quality of the cardiac cells. So I mean, these are things that are not unusual. And now this is what we did. We applied this to security. We're just counting. We're looking at how do we categorize it by its purpose and how we count them. And when we have that, yeah, I can't tell you how big a network is. You know, I can't tell you, I don't know, how great it is. But I can tell you how healthy it is for its environment based on what I count. Now imagine for a second that the compliance recommendations that you have to follow don't give a crap about how many firewalls you have, how many systems have antivirus, how you configure screening routers. Instead, imagine it wanted this count so that it could tell you how healthy it was for its environment. That would be amazing. But it would piss off a lot of lobbyists, right? We spend a lot of money to get the country. But we can do this, and we figured out the way. And that's what OSCE 3 was about. So we found out that purpose and interactions are linked to the environment. So when we test, we found different phases for testing the different environments so that we knew that we could go through and in these different phases get different information so that we know not just how it interacts, but also what it does, how it operates. Which leads us to the count that we could have and use. We also found that risk is dynamic and attack surface is static. That was another thing. We found that risk was too biased and too ugly to use for security. Okay? Because there was a loser. And because everybody thought something different. So for example, you find a vulnerability, but that vulnerability might be horrible for one guy, but not for you. I'm sure some of you have done this where you've gotten a vulnerability report that says that this service is bad, but you know for a fact it isn't, because that scan is relying on just blind information and not knowing which controls you already have in place. That's part of the problem. You might have controls in place that the scanner doesn't know about. It's only looking at the version, for example. And so they're going to base risk differently. I have better examples if you want to talk to me later about that, but I don't want to get into it. But I just want to show you for a second. So we looked at this by saying, okay, look at this idyllic setting, you know, nice family out here in beautiful Twilight, and they're vampires. They're here. These human beings, what is their risk to injury at this point? I think most of you would say close to zero, right? I mean, it doesn't look like anything bad's going to happen. Just go with me here as a story, honestly. It's close to zero. These human beings, their attack surface, if somebody was going to attack them in this idyllic scenario, what is their attack surface? Probably close to 100%. If you're going to attack them, there's not much they could do about it. They would die. Okay? And that's it. In the next scenario, you take these same people, you put them in a war-torn area. Okay? What is their risk of injury? It goes way up, right? What is their attack surface? Absolutely the same. It doesn't change. Okay? And so that was something else we found. Attack surface doesn't change. So if we could count all this stuff, and we could measure these things, and we could find the attack surface, which we have been able to, we had something static regardless of how the environment changed. Which was interesting, because once you knew the environment, and you measured the environment, you would be able to do this, and you'd be able to move things around, and you could even figure out what the attack surface prevention of a product is before you bought it in a new place. Because you knew the environment. And you would just be combining the math, the numbers. Okay, there's only 3 types of interactions with a target. Visibility, access, and trust. I talked about before, only 2 ways to steal something, access and trust. But the 3 types of interactions, there's one more. There's visibility. That doesn't actually help you take anything. And that's exposure. That's somebody having opportunity. One of the few things police science actually got right. There's only 10 operational controls for all threats. You apply these Class A interactive and process controls from authentication down to alarm, you've covered everything that you can possibly control, which allows us then to be able to cover anything. Now the modern network, most of you will recognize this. Let's say you have a screening router, okay? You have a firewall. In IDS, you are using HTTPS here, 443, okay? You have login and CAPTCHA. You have antivirus. Of your 10 controls in the modern network, how many do you normally see in use? And most of you agree this is pretty typical, right? I mean, most of you have seen this. You have authentication. As you go through, you see a pattern. You see a pattern. They made a perimeter here. All the other attacks, if it's human, wireless, whatever, still open, okay? But no, we're focusing on network security. And the attack, if it can break identification or authorization, it breaks all of authentications, okay? This is the problem. This is what you see. Authentication, 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 confidentiality, alarm, okay? Of the 10 controls. And you know what? That passes for defense in depth. Most of you would have told me that was defense in depth. Okay? And that was part of the problem. So we know that 100% security is perfect balance. We were trying to find out what is 100% versus 0% security. We cannot find 0% security. It doesn't exist. But we can find 100% and we can come down. Okay? We can find perfect security as a balance between controls and operations. Running out of time. So we're talking about defense and width. You can actually, for every single interaction, provide all 10 controls and have a perfect security, a perfect balance between your interactions that are done completely safely. Okay? Problem is, expensive for every single interaction. Time-consuming and expensive, and if you're busy running around updating and patching your software and putting out fires, you're never going to find time for it. Okay? The other thing you got to know is security requires knowing more than vulnerabilities. You also have to know the vector. Okay? What was tested? What was not tested? How it was tested? What are all the controls? Most people are not testing to say what controls exist and which are missing. That has to be in a security or pen test because that doesn't help people. Okay? Just to know what vulnerabilities. They have to know what controls are there and which are missing, or they'll never find that balance. We found only 10 non-fallacious reasons to trust. The rest were all fallacies. Again, this is in the ALSTA. We found that we can quantify reasons to trust. You can't quantify trust because it's biased, like risk. But reasons to trust you can quantify, which is really interesting because then you can use it as a form of lie detection. Not because you can tell if somebody's telling a lie, because that's pretty much impossible. Okay? You can't tell. I think it was 54% trained people can pick out if somebody's telling the truth or a lie. Those people who read micro-expressions. Independent studies show 54%, even though the advertising stuff lies. Okay? They say, oh, 85%. Whatever, not true. But what we found was that instead of detecting somebody's lying, detect if they have more or less reason to tell you the truth. If they have more reason to tell you the truth, and it satisfies you, then that's better than any lie detection you can ask for. So here's the 10 trust properties we found. I don't have time to go through them, sorry. Trust metrics can offset controls. Once you have that, instead of using risk and guessing, you can look at how much you trust things. Actually, quantitatively, I wrote low, medium, high. Sorry, you can actually put a number on there, 86.7%. You can actually get it quantified. And then you can say where I have no trust, I want more controls. Where I have, or less trust, I have more controls. Where I have more trust, I have less controls. And that would actually help save you the time and the money. And you can build up from there. Okay, that's it. I'm out of time.